Well, why don't we go ahead and begin? I got to tell you, it is so nice giving a reading in front of your hometown. You're going to have to dodge around this thing. And that's I'll move back and forth periodically. See? Okay. There's nothing quite like that. And I appreciate everybody coming. What I want to do before we begin is basically thank Holly and Nova for providing this space and cramming it this tight. Isn't it nice to have a bookstore in town again? Yes. Isn't it? Can I have a little bit of... So, my name is, for those of you who don't know, my name is Bing, and I tell stories. And one of the questions that I get regularly is, where do you get those stories from? And the answer is really pretty simple. I get them, I started out getting them when I was working freelance all over the Pacific Northwest, and I was putting like 35,000 miles a year on a pickup truck. And every once in a while, I would stop in a small town cafe, and I would find the locals table, and I would just sit, grateful for the white lines stopping. But I would listen to the stories that the locals were telling them. I would listen to the stories that the locals would tell. And periodically, I'd find one that tripped my trigger, and I'd ask, can I use that? And then I'd get a few more details. And that's where it started. But it gradually morphed into getting stories through email, phone calls, and running into friends. So I wrote a story about getting a story, which is kind of what writers do. And this is it. This happened at an auction. It was years back, just south of town. I don't even remember exactly where it was. But this is how I arrived at one more story. In truth, these stories arrive many different ways. We've had phone calls, letters, and emails asking if we were interested in a particular story. Sometimes yes, and frankly, other times not so much. But for the most part, they arrive like this one did when I was hanging around the outskirts of a livestock and equipment sale. It was a bright summer day when I ran into a friend I hadn't seen in a couple of years. We stepped outside the crowd to catch up on each other's families and lives. Then he says, you know, I have a story you might appreciate. I said, okay, I'll take that bait. What is it? And he said, a while back, I was sitting alongside the road talking on my cell phone when an SUV pulled over on the other side of the highway. A guy with a big honking camera jumped out of that SUV. Now, I need to pause here for a second. The photographer in this story is not me. Okay, let's not start any rumors. I know what to do here. He didn't. He went on. My friend went on. The guy climbed over a barbed wire fence and focused his camera on some chickens pecking around in a pasture. He wasn't paying attention to the big livestock guard dog trotting in his direction. Rough, swollen, tail sticking straight up in the air. I knew the place he was talking about. It was a small ranch where they sell meat direct to consumers. Part of their operation includes free-range chickens in mobile enclosures called chicken tractors. They use the intense pecking of the many birds to clean parasites from their fields. When the birds are old enough, they do their part in feeding local families. Uh-oh, I said. Well, yeah, my friend said. I yelled to him, but he was concentrating on pointing his camera at the birds and waved me off. By now, the big dog was in a high trot, coming to investigate the intruder, looking at his chickens. This time, my friend yelled, "Hey!" and pointed to the dog. He ignored my friend and waved him off again. I asked, "Well, what happened?" And I finally yelled, "Dog!" and as loud as I could and pointed in its direction. The camera guy turned his head and he saw the problem. Suddenly the photographer lost interest in chicken pictures. Turning and sprinting for the fence, he crawled at high speed, thoroughly moistened in hot dog breath, back through the barbed wire fence. I don't know if anybody here has ever had the pleasure of climbing at high speed through a barbed wire fence. I mean, I was just saying, you know.
With watermelon?
Yeah, well, yeah. And yeah, I chuckled. Yeah, maybe he figured out why there were no trespassing signs hanging on that fence. And that, folks, is how a story ends up in our hands. Now, the rest of the story, if that photographer, by chance, reads this book, I think it's probably unlikely. He's probably still nursing his scar tissue. We hope he understands that while we laughed at his expense, neither I nor my friend meant him any harm. But that big dog, that might have been an entirely different kind of a deal. So if you have questions during this, please ask. We'll, I'll do my best to answer them. This next story is a story that starts with an act of kindness, and it ends with an act of kindness. The first act of kindness comes from a gruff, old Irish dairyman to an earnest young farm veterinarian whose diagnosis of a sick cow didn't work, and the cow died. "It's okay, Doc. They die," he said as he patted the vet gently on the shoulder. That remark of acceptance made an enormous amount of difference for the fresh out of school vet who was working hard to find his footing in a remote and rural practice. Over the years, the Irishman and the vet became working friends. Sometime later, the dairyman's grandson took an interest in the family operation, and to that end, he acquired a young stock dog named Buck. The dog was working well, and the vet enjoyed seeing the dog whenever he was on a farm call. Then one day, the vet got a phone call from the Irishman. Could he come take a look at Buck? Something was wrong with his hindquarters. It seemed like he was partially paralyzed. A physical and neurological exam showed no indication of injury or nerve damage. Any additional testing was expensive and out of the small-time dairyman's budgetary price range. So the veterinarian prescribed a course of pain-blocking medication to the young dog's discomfort and hopefully allow him to heal himself. He gave the owner a lengthy list of instructions, and sent him home with the dog. A few days later, the dairyman called back and said there had been no improvement at all. He was a busy man with a dairy to run, and he thought it might be time for euthanasia. By this time, the farm vet had grown quite fond of Buck. He'd proved to be a very pleasant and personable dog. He was also interested in the animal's medical condition. The vet asked, "Would you be willing to give Buck to me, and I'll continue to do what I can for him, of course, euthanizing if it becomes necessary?" The Irishman agreed, and the vet took Buck home. The first thing he did was call in a favor from a human clinic that had a CT scanner. Now this would give him a much more detailed picture than the x-ray of the dog's afflicted area. After regular business hours, he quietly slipped in the door and tiptoed down the halls carrying Buck in his arms. Now, let me pause here for a second. You got a veterinarian that's new in town. He's calling in a favor, and he's slipping a dog into the CT scanner. I was told by the veterinarian, who was retired now, that this was more of a spy seek spy kind of a deal. They would open the door, poke their heads in, and go tiptoeing down the hallway, Buck, dog in arms, until they got to there. Then they'd come back out of the CT scanner, run down the hallway with the dog in their arms, and back out and relock the clinic door. It was all done after hours. Throughout the entire ordeal, Buck was as endearing as ever. However, there was a problem. The results showed nothing. The dog appeared normal in the scans. It was time for the next step. The farm vet contacted an outfit across the state specializing in making carts to increase the mobility of dogs with hind limb paralysis. As it happened, they had one available which had been returned by another client. As a bonus, it had big, extra big, all-terrain tires. The vet got it in the mail, fitted it to Buck, and it took him 5 minutes to figure it out. He was happily motoring around the veterinary office on his front legs, greeting each employee with a sniff and a lick. From then on, every morning the vet would load Buck and his cart onto the floor of his pickup, and they'd head to the office. When it came time for the farm calls, Buck was loaded back into the truck, and off they'd go. Buck would spend the entire farm call bumping around the pasture, checking scents, just giving anyone he met a sniff and a lick. Among the far-flung people in the rural American West, communities gather for a variety of different reasons. Many times, these gatherings evolve into a social event where distant neighbors take the time to relax, enjoy a bit of downtime, and catch up with each other's lives. In this region, this particular community, they had a blood donation drive about every month or so. And that was a community event. Well, Buck would arrive at the blood drive with his veterinary escort and make the rounds like any small town political candidate, offering everyone his trademark sniff and lick. He'd approach each person with a soulful look in his eye, and if he got a pat on the head, he'd lay his head in their lap and continue his gaze. After a moment of mutual bliss, he'd move on to his next new friend. He continued around the room, working the crowd for all it was worth, and the people enjoyed the show. If Buck had been a human being, there's no doubt he could have been elected county commissioner. But there was a problem at home. Whatever had afflicted Buck's nervous system and rear legs ascended to where his front legs began to fail. There was nothing else to do for him. Lying alone on the fire without being able to get up wouldn't have been much of a life for a dog that's bred to be active. Plus, it would have been marking time until the problem progressed to where he could no longer breathe. The farm vet and his family said goodbye to Buck, while his life was still good, and they laid him to rest in the spot they reserved for other members of their furred family. Now that's where this story ends. An act of kindness on behalf of a dog that didn't have any kind of a fair shake with his health. but he did the best he could with what he had for as long as he was able. Now this next story, I need a show of hands. How many of the people in the audience here are veterans? Okay. Of the veterans in the room, how many of you have seen combat? Okay. Story is for you guys. This is a story about a dog named Atlas. Since he got out of the military, DL has a new lease on life. If asked how that happened, he'll give tons of credit to his service dog Atlas. He says, just like his namesake in Greek mythology, Atlas is the one who carries the weight of the world on his shoulders. In this case, I'm his world. This former combat medic with post-traumatic stress disorder has come a long way since his fighting to survive days. He has a new job, the best relationship with his kids he's had in a long time, and while his nightmares haven't quit, his buddy Atlas watches over him when he sleeps. DL says, every night, the nightmare is the same. Just when the pain, blood, and violence of his dream are at their most intense, some character in the dream will reach out and lick him in the face. You know, let me ask the combat guys, when you were in combat, was there any face licking? There was other priorities at the time. You know that doesn't happen in combat. This is so far from the reality of war that it'll yank DL out of his dream state and he'll lay there in bed, his breathing and heart rate slowly recovering, with Atlas's nose inches from his face as he licks him again. DL says, I can't possibly describe the amount of pain those nighttime licks have saved me. He's my buddy. Well, by any measure, it's tough for a nightmare to survive the anxious and attentive slurping tongue of a dog. But Atlas's service isn't finished when the sun halos the mountain in the east. They have a meeting with a half-dozen veterans who are candidates for their own PTSD service dogs. For DL, it's an appointment, a heartfelt labor of giving back. But for Atlas, it's showtime. One by one, the veterans file into the reception area. Their eyes are all the same, a mixture of pain, colored slightly with the tiniest inkling of hope. They bear the body language of an abused dog in an animal shelter that's been returned more times than it can count, and watches everyone who comes in the door, hoping against hope. Each veteran is way outside his comfort zone. He says, "Hi, my name is DL, and this is my service dog, Atlas," he says, pointing to the dog laying between his feet. Introductions and a brief military resume are offered. Each relaxes slightly as they realize everyone in the room has been through a similar situation and speaks the same language. Even so, their eyes are constantly moving, aware and assessing. While sitting, they are balanced on the balls of their feet, aware of tiny sounds in the other parts of the office. Meanwhile, Atlas lies calmly between DL's feet, eyes closed. Now, he's not sleeping, but radiating calm and being aware of everything that is going on in the room. Each of these veterans has made a choice to take a chance and seek a better life. They're not sure what's involved, The conversation ranges far and wide, but the questions always return to the service dogs. How do I get through an airport and into the plane with a dog? Do they treat you okay? What about restaurants and places where they have trouble with phony service dogs? How do you get a dog on an escalator, and will they be okay for my kids at home? Well, in some cases, reassurances are made. In other cases, we'll cover a lot of that as you and the dog get used to each other. You'll need to walk your walk, and when you run into something you're not sure how to handle, contact the other vets in your group, and we're here to support you. Throughout this entire time, Atlas, eyes still closed, continues to radiate calm. Now, DL is a private person, but he understands how to work with the public. His conversation can get animated when he's trying to make a point, and his volume picks up slightly. Each time the conversation gets a little more intense, one of Atlas's deep brown eyes will pop open, and he'll glance at DL to make sure if everything is still okay. If DL's voice is sharper than usual, Atlas will sit up, scanning his face until he's assured that all is well. When that's over, he lays down and closes his eyes once again, radiating calm the entire time. As each veteran steps back into the office with the service dog trainers, DL says, "Don't worry. Me and Atlas will be with you for the rest of your 5 weeks of training. If you have any questions or run into any problems, we'll get it handled." I haven't seen the rest of the story. I haven't seen DL for a year and a half. But at the time this story was written, DL and Atlas had been working together for just over a year. In many ways, DL's life has improved measurably since that relationship began. But life happens. Bills need to be paid. Work intrigues must be dealt with, and there are just too darn many things to get done. Plus, there are still times, especially at night, where DL is unable to keep his mind from going to that dark place. When that happens, he relies on his buddy to have his back and give him a big, juicy dog slurp just when he needs it most. That makes a bad day better. This next story happened on a small ranch just south of here, just on the other side of Juniper Butte. Stock dogs have their own job description when the year's new growth arrives. Soon calves will be branded, turned out on range, and need to be moved to new pastures. However, sometimes there's parts of their job not included in their contract's fine print. First thing most people notice about a key is her eyes. Some people call them wise eyes. Do you have that picture? And let me pause and get a drink of water. I'll show you a picture of a key. You mind if we pass this around? No one knows much about a key's breeding. She's a generic Indian reservation stock dog, large enough to intimidate a cranky cow, yet small enough to ride easily in the pickup's jump seat. Some folks say there's a touch of coyote in her distant background. A key and the old rancher are best buddies. She shadows him constantly from the time he arises until when he totters off to bed. No leash is necessary. If he's on horseback, she's tucked in near his stirrup. If he's afoot, she's walking alongside. It was calving season. It It was calving season, and the old rancher was recovering from a pulled hamstring muscle. Nothing serious, but it hurt like the dickens. Every day he managed chores, but it was slow going. On this day, he spotted a newborn calf snoozing in the spring sunshine. The cow, hard work of a successful birth completed, nibbled on the grass 100 feet away. All looked to be the way it should be. But the old rancher was curious. He thought this might be a good time to peek and determine the sex of the calf. So, limping along, he climbed over the fence into the pasture. Now, he's been at this a long time. He knows some cattle are sometimes protective of their young. He kept an eye on the cow while hobbling along. The mama cow, was completely unfazed. She munched on her grass while her little one dreamed of warm milk and sunny pastures. And groaning, the old rancher stooped and lifted the calf's hind leg. It was a healthy heifer, he thought, and slowly he started backing up to the fence. That's when the calf woke up. Quick show of hands. How many people are in the cattle business in the room? You know, you can see what's coming though, can't you? Okay. That's when the calf woke up. Now, a newborn calf, for those of you who don't know, is a bleary-eyed little animal that locates its mother by smell and sensing movement. It can't really focus on anything in particular, it's just movement. The smell of this calf's mother was all around in the gentle breeze. Feeling the need to nurse, the confused little animal's eyes followed the first moving blur it could find. See it coming, don't you? Which was the old rancher slowly hobbling toward the fence. That's when several things happened very, very quickly. The calf, seeking sustenance and maternal nurturing, climbed to its unsteady feet and followed the old rancher. The cow, seeing her newborn calf wobbling off in the wrong direction, fixed her protective eye on the slowly moving mini parade toward the fence. You see it coming. The old rancher, realizing a problem was developing, limped faster. Then the calf, thinking her mother was moving away, bawled her distress. The cow, fearing for her frightened little one, pawed the ground and made a full-speed, mother bear-style protective run at the rancher. At that same instant, the old rancher knew with absolute clarity that he was about to get bottom plowed into a bloody smear across his own field. That's when Aki, that little dog that you just saw, who had been lounging in the nearby shade, lifted her head to pay attention to the unfolding situation. Like a hunting cheetah, she closed on the mad mother cow, and the fight was on. Leaping into the air, she locked her jaws on the cow's tender nose. Boom. Furious, the cow bellowed, slinging snot, saliva, and dog back and forth as she raced around the pasture. Aki tightened her grip and hung on while she was being used in a bovine version of Crack the Canine Whip. Meanwhile, the old rancher, unable to do anything to help his dog in her precarious situation, completed his hobbling retreat and climbed to safety. That was the signal for Aki to drop off the cow's nose and scuttle through the fence. Then the angry cow hurried to her confused calf, offering maternal consolation. Back in the house, the rancher's relieved wife who'd witnessed the entire incident, decided it might be a good thing for him to take the rest of the day off so his leg could heal. The old rancher was fine with that, he said as he was relaxing into his easy chair with his foot on a stool. Now, I've got a couple of rest of the stories on this. Just a couple weeks later, Ann and I, most of you know Ann, my wife, was visiting the old rancher and his wife. And Aki was sitting by the old rancher's side while he rested his hand on her head. I asked the old rancher, "Well, so how do you feel about Aki now, that she saved your bacon?" "Well, you know," he drawled, and those of you who know him, he drawled, "I wasn't looking for a dog when I got this one, but she's about 97% perfection in a good dog. Now, if someone had trimmed her dew claws so they didn't get caught in the brush, she'd have been an even 98% good dog." So now you got the definition of a good dog from Jefferson County. So there you go, folks. Now you know what it takes to be a good dog. By the way, during our entire conversation, Aki rested her head on the old rancher's lap and soaked it all in. As long as he was there, she was fine. It didn't matter to her what we talked about. Now, let me set this aside for a moment. There's more to this story. It was a couple years later, and the old rancher passed. That basically tore the underpinnings out from Aki. Now, it didn't mean Aki had a good place to stay. Aki worked beautifully with the old rancher's wife, but her buddy was gone. And as is the case in this country, when so many times when this happens, when somebody like this passes, a lot of the old equipment gets sold off. And that was really hard on Aki. The rancher's wife had to be really careful. Whenever somebody was loading out equipment or loading this or that up to take it away, because they'd paid for it. It was theirs now. Aki didn't understand. All she understood was that the rancher's stuff was being taken away, and she didn't get it. She several times, in order to stop that, made a run at the back of somebody's leg. As a matter of fact, it happened. Aki was one of Ann and I's favorite dogs. As a matter of fact, it happened when we were loading out some stock tanks. To me, I was on the other end of a stock tank, and we were putting it up on the back of our pickup. And all of a sudden, I heard from the rancher's wife, "Aki, no." And then I heard from Ann, "Aki, don't worry. We'll take good care of it. We're taking it home. It's okay." And Aki stopped. I didn't get chomped. But it was a tough thing to watch as Aki, her world was slowly dismantled. It needed to be done, and it was done as well as it could be. It was this summer where Aki and the old rancher's wife grew a garden. I mean, these two were tight by this time. They grew a garden, and she had especially good luck with pumpkins. Now, how many of you have had stock dogs before? Okay, you know a stock dog will choose their favorite spot and pee on it. Okay. A key chose one of those pumpkins to get up every morning and pee on. Now, she understood that Ann and I were pretty darn close to a key. So when it came time, trying to remember exactly how this goes in order here. When it came time to harvest these pumpkins, she brought us the pumpkin that Aki had peed on every morning. Now, before we start any rumors in this town, it was a well-washed pumpkin, okay? I mean, I want everybody to be clear about that. No rumors. And it still is sitting on our counter and will end up as probably pumpkin soup sometime this winter or something like that. So since that time, after that, it was as fall was approaching. I don't remember the exact dates, but Aki has passed. She had a medical condition that there was just no coming back from. And so Aki is gone now. But she's out of her pain. So that's the rest of the story. Ann and I have a peed on pumpkin at home. And
we love it.
Yeah, we'll eat well.
That pumpkin vine was the fastest growing thing and the first thing to bloom and the first thing to bear fruit in the garden.
Let me take a moment and introduce, this is Nancy Klatt. This is the old rancher's wife. We've been friends for years. We've known each other for a long time.
He saved his bacon more than once. Too.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the story, the rest of the story of Aki. Now, this story is about Captain Patches. Has anyone in here been on parent patrol where you've had your parent or a loved one of some sort in hospice? It's not an easy spot. Captain Patches is a hospice therapy dog. A hospice, for those of you who have not had that experience, hospice is a fragile time for folks who are steadily losing, drip by drip, everything they used to know and understand. One by one, their physical activities are given up while they emotionally prepare themselves for the end. According to the former Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu, the act of, it's called Ubuntu. I don't know, that's not pronounced correctly. I don't know. If somebody knows how, please correct me on that. But that is a person through other persons. When someone loses contact for whatever reason from other people they know and recognize, some of their humanity slips away. Now, Rob and Captain Patches are trained hospice volunteers. They've been doing it for years. One thing they've learned over time is it's better not to argue with little old ladies, but rather let them have their dance. On a good day, this woman would chat and swap stories. A bad day meant she could barely move a hand or her arm. For her, quality of life meant a visit from hospice volunteers, Rob and therapy dog Captain Patches. In most cases, Rob wouldn't allow his canine star of the show on the bed. But for this woman, he made an exception. From the moment they walked in the room, she would continually be patting and loving on his 60-pound rescue dog. During the entire session, Her husband would sit smiling quietly in his appointed chair on the other side of the room. "Can I have Captain Patches?" she'd coo. "Can he stay with me?" Each time, Rob patiently explained that his dog had other hospice patients to visit, and it was important Captain Patches stay with him to get that work done. The dog ownership dance between Rob and this woman continued through that spring and into a hot summer. Each visit found her husband dutifully sitting quietly on the other side of the room with a fan blowing cooling air over her. One day, Rob walked in for a visit with Captain Patches following behind. She beamed and patted the bed where the dog regularly sat. When all were comfortable, the ownership tango began. "I'd really like it if Captain Patches could stay with me," she said. "Well, you know," Rob began. That's when she started rapidly batting her eyes in Rob's direction. Now, Rob paused. He wasn't sure what to do. He recognized that she was flirting and upping her game in acquiring his dog. She sweetened the offer. "If you'll let me keep Captain Patches, you can have my favorite possession," she offered, her gaze lighting on the cooling fan. "Well, I really couldn't," he said. Eyelids still fluttering in his direction, she aimed a smile at Rob and ratcheted up her offer again. "You know, you can have my husband too. He's really a good worker." Gently, Rob smiled. "I'm sure he is, but there's nowhere for Captain Patches to sleep here," he said, thinking quickly. "And besides, he really does need to see other people." Slowly, gracefully, Rob said goodbye to the lonely woman who was facing the end of her life. He made his way down the hall to the next hospice patient. The following week, they stopped by her room again. She was glad to see them and continued the dog ownership dance. Now, as long-time hospice volunteers, Rob knows he and Captain Patches begin their work the moment they arrive on a motorcycle with a sidecar. He pauses in the parking lot to help the dog out of his protective eyewear. Then, flower bouquet in hand, they march into the building where the Captain Patches steals the show. Like closed flowers on a chilly spring day, the residents open to receive the sunshine of the dog's unconditional love and acceptance. Smiles bloom around the room. But to suppose a dog gets nothing out of the deal would be a mistake. Years back, when Captain Patches was a youngster and Rob was starting out, they visited a man whose wife was in an assisted living center. The man was thrilled with the visits. He loved dogs. He and Rob had much in common with their mutual love of all things canine. Rob continued visiting. However, the man's wife was uninterested. For 2 years of regular visits, neither Rob nor Captain Patches interacted with her. She had little or no emotional response. Eventually, the man passed and left his wife alone in the facility. One day, on a whim, the duo stopped by to check on her. Well, she looked up with interest in her eyes for the first time. Then she reached out to pet Captain Patches. Slowly, she made tentative conversation with Rob. Haltingly, they talked about her life. Over the next month, visits continued. Captain Patches acted like a catalyst for a budding friendship. Conversation was no longer strained. Slowly, Rob realized that every time they entered this facility, the dog beelined straight to her room. A couple of years passed, and eventually so did their friend. But for a year afterward, each time the duo entered that building, Captain Patches led the way to her room, checking to see if his friend had returned. Now, no one knows what triggered this woman's withdrawal from her life and humanity. However, when that happened, the return road is long and difficult. Outside assistance is imperative. Captain Patches helped her, he says, Captain Patches helped her bridge that gap. He helped her return to her community, to her humanity. It's not easy for a human to not be human. To return, well, that's pretty remarkable. Her joy of living, once lost and now returned. There's not really much more to say about a dog, except maybe to make sure he gets respect for a job well done. Oh, yeah, and make sure you give him a good ear rub now and then. But Rob takes care of that. Now, I haven't seen Captain Patches for a couple of years. But at the time, Captain Patches was getting old. One day, it'll be his turn to step through the veil. To that end, Rob has acquired Lambeau, a puppy who's gentle, loves people and other dogs, to step into Captain Patch's shoes when the event arrives. However, Rob wants something made very clear. I don't want to diminish the end of Captain Patch's life with a puppy taking all the attention and driving him crazy. That's why Lambeau doesn't get to ride in a motorcycle sidecar until senior dog no longer has a need. In everything else, Rob and the junior dog have worked out where each is getting their own share of love. An aging dog getting the respect he deserves seems a fitting finale after he's helped a couple thousand people find their best possible path at the end of their life's journey. So I'll probably one day get a hold of Captain Patches and see how that's going. I would imagine, I don't know it, I would imagine that Lambeau has probably, when I last talked to Rob and Rob, it was just going into COVID, and he had just lost his job. So he was frantically figuring out where he was going to make a living. So we'll see. I don't know. I'll chase him down and I'll find him again. And this last story is my story. It's about a dog named Boogie. Now Boogie and I have traveled many. I'm the photographer in this story. This one I admit. Boogie and I have traveled many miles together. She's the dog that, when I put a camera to my eye, will sit directly behind me so as not to mess up that photo. When the camera comes down, she goes back to sniffing all the interesting smells. This isn't something I've taught her. In fact, before I knew what she was doing, I'd step backward and stumble over her. Frankly, that was cause for a few exciting moments between us. And that's what we were doing during this final story. She was my photographer's assistant while I'd been assigned to take pictures at a horse-drawn equipment auction. Now, my ears were ringing with the auctioneer's chant. The smell of greasy corn dogs and overcooked pizza clogged my nasal passages. There were too many things to see, and I was worn out. It was time to take a break, so I headed for the parking lot. Leaning against the seat in my pickup's open door, I sipped water and nibbled on my stashed granola. My dog jumped out of the truck, and I asked, "Are you tired of sitting? How about we take a walk and let's both clear our heads?" I slipped a rope leash over her head, more for the sake of the people around me than for any need on her part. As we walked, I tucked the end of the rope through one of my camera backpack straps. She trotted by my side and sniffed her way through the equipment aisles. That's when the old timer noticed us and said, "Hey, you got a pretty good handle on that dog." We said, "Thanks. We spent a lot of time together and have taught each other pretty well." I kept going. I said, I told him I got her from a hired man who worked on a ranch deep in the desert. When she was a pup, it took me more than a month to convince her that there was more than 4 humans on the earth. After that, we bonded pretty tight. The old-timer had long-distance blue eyes that looked more comfortable navigating a ridge than stepping into a city crosswalk. His salt and pepper beard was so long that it probably caught any crumbs spilled while eating beside a campfire. He knew how to introduce himself to a stock dog. Bending over, he let her sniff the back of his hand. When she was finished, he squatted to her height and scratched her back. Now, Boogie is usually as standoffish with strangers. I was surprised when she didn't summarily dismiss him. Rather, she leaned in his attentions and keeping an eye on his facial expressions. He said to me, "When my last dog was a pup, I took her and my mule into the Colorado mountains for 4 months. She didn't know anything other than me and that mule. That's when a person really learns to relate to a dog." Then he continued, "Thanks. I appreciate you letting me love on your dog for a while. You know, I think I'll get one more dog to see me out of this life." "Well, good luck to you," I said. Well, Boogie and I wandered off in a separate direction through the crowd. A few minutes later, Boogie and I stepped aside from the ebb and flow of auction traffic. I hunkered down and she turned to face me, wondering what I wanted. I gave her one of her favorite ear rubs. "Thank you for giving that lonely old guy his dog fix," I told her. She stared back, her ears were erect, and her head cocked. By her body language, I understood the old-timer was in the past. She was more concerned about finding a rat or squirrel to hunt somewhere in a forgotten corner of the auction. Now, I smiled back at her, and we moved back into the crowd. There was at least one of us that was hoping to spot a rodent. Folks, moments of grace are a rare thing in this world. Dogs tend to be better at it than humans at creating these special times. These days, Boogie is showing her age. Her fur is getting tufty, her hearing isn't what it was, and she spends more time on the rug near the wood stove. I try not to laugh when a rodent gets away from her these days. But when her time comes, that's fine. We've had a good long run, and I'm content with our adventures together. And yes, when that happens, I'll probably get another dog to see me out of this life. So the rest of the story on that is last summer, Boogie passed. Want to know what I did? I went and got another dog. Big old tall thing. He's 2.5 years old, highly intelligent, smarter than me sometimes, and we're trying to figure each other's ways out. I'd have brought him in tonight, but he's not ready. I think Holly would have thrown me out of here for good. So anyway, does anybody have any questions? There it is. Thank you for coming. What? One question.
I did have one comment about what people do with dogs. My cousin had 2 dogs for a while. One was older and one was younger. And I thought they were calling the young one Artie, A-R-T-E-Y or A-R-T-I-E, but it was R-D.
Yeah.
And that was for replacement dogs.
Yeah. Yeah, without speaking the obvious. Okay. So anyway, that's all I got, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to see you all here.
If you're interested in copies of the book, we